The world is watching, the headlines scream peace, the leaders shake hands, and the cameras capture the smiles. But behind the bright lights, something feels off. You feel it too, don't you? That quiet voice inside whispering, is this real? Or is it just another show? For decades, Iran and Israel have danced on the edge of war. Shadow strikes, assassinations, proxy battles, nuclear threats. And now, suddenly, a ceasefire. Just like that. But let me tell you something. Peace doesn't come easy between enemies soaked in decades of blood, fear, and betrayal. This isn't just about two nations. This is about global power plays, secret deals, and agendas that reach far beyond what they show you on the screen. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain. Today, we're going to dive into the real truth they don't want you to see. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this so-called peace might just be the most dangerous illusion of all. The hostility between Iran and Israel didn't begin with one airstrike or one speech. It's the result of decades of deep-rooted tension, shaped by ideology, history, and the pursuit of power in a region that has never known lasting peace. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran's stance on Israel has been crystal clear. It does not recognize the legitimacy of the Israeli state. This ideological opposition is not just political, it's theological, rooted in a worldview that sees Israel as an illegitimate occupier and the West as complicit in its support. Iran's leaders have repeatedly condemned Israel's treatment of Palestinians and have positioned themselves as the defenders of oppressed Muslims across the region, particularly in Gaza and the West Bank. On the other hand, Israel sees Iran as its greatest existential threat in the modern era. The concern isn't just about Iran's military capabilities or its support for proxy groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. It's about Iran's growing influence across the Middle East, its nuclear ambitions, and its consistent rhetoric that challenges Israel's very right to exist. Over the years, Israel has carried out numerous covert operations against Iranian assets, including the assassinations of nuclear scientists, sabotage of nuclear facilities, and cyber attacks meant to slow down Iran's technological progress. Iran has responded by strengthening its regional alliances, building networks that stretch from Lebanon to Yemen, and positioning itself as a direct counterforce to Israel's dominance. This cycle of escalation has created a climate where both nations exist in a constant state of high alert. It's not a declared war, but it's a war in every sense. A shadow conflict fought through proxies, misinformation, sabotage, and the occasional open strike. Syria has become one of the key battlegrounds where this conflict plays out, with Israeli jets frequently targeting Iranian positions while Iran continues to entrench its presence. The animosity is baked into their military doctrines, their foreign policies, and even their national identities. Because of this long-standing hostility, any announcement of a ceasefire must be met with skepticism. The wounds are too deep, the history too bloody, the trust too absent. What we're seeing today may be presented to the world as a breakthrough, but underneath it lies a reality that's been building for over 40 years, one where neither side has ever truly laid down its weapons, only moved them back into the shadow. A history like this doesn't end with a handshake or a headline. It lingers, it simmers, and sometimes it just waits for the next spark. Behind the scenes of the Iran-Israel ceasefire, powerful global forces are constantly maneuvering, each with their own interests that often have little to do with peace and everything to do with control. The Middle East has always been a chessboard for larger powers, and this ceasefire is no exception. The United States, as Israel's strongest ally, has a vested interest in maintaining a level of stability while simultaneously ensuring that its strategic partner remains dominant in the region. For years, the U.S. has supported Israel's security concerns regarding Iran, providing military aid, intelligence, and diplomatic cover at international forums. Yet, as America's own domestic challenges mount and its appetite for direct military involvement abroad wanes, Washington has quietly pushed for de-escalation, not out of principle, but out of necessity. At the same time, Russia and China observe this conflict from their own strategic vantage points. Russia, deeply involved in Syria and maintaining military alliances with both Iran and the Assad regime, benefits from a weakened but active conflict that allows it to remain a critical player in Middle Eastern politics. A full-scale war between Iran and Israel would destabilize Russia's interests, particularly in Syria, where it operates alongside Iranian forces. Therefore, Russia quietly supports any agreement that keeps tensions controlled without completely eliminating them. This balancing act allows Moscow to maintain leverage over both sides. China's role is more economically driven, as Iran's largest oil customer and a growing player in global energy markets. China has invested heavily in keeping Iranian oil flowing despite Western sanctions. A destabilized Iran threatens China's energy security. So Beijing has an interest in preventing an all-out war while strengthening its ties with Tehran through long-term economic and infrastructure agreements. At the same time, China maintains growing economic relations with Israel, particularly in technology and infrastructure projects. This dual engagement gives China increasing influence over both nations without directly taking sides. The European Union, while less militarily involved, also has a stake in preventing escalation. A wider conflict could trigger refugee crises, disrupt global oil markets, and further destabilize an already fragile global economy. Therefore, European nations often support ceasefire initiatives, not as a solution to the conflict's root causes, but as a temporary measure to avoid immediate consequences that could ripple across the country. In the end, these global powers apply pressure behind closed doors, using diplomacy, trade deals, and political leverage to steer both Iran and Israel into temporary agreements. But these agreements serve their own agendas first. Real peace is secondary to stability, and stability often means maintaining a fragile artificial calm while the deeper issues remain unresolved, waiting for the next geopolitical shift to reignite the flames. Beneath the surface of high-level negotiations and public declarations, both Iran and Israel face significant domestic pressures that heavily influence their decisions on whether to engage in conflict or pursue temporary peace. For Iran, years of crushing economic sanctions have taken a severe toll on its population. Inflation has soared, unemployment has risen, and many ordinary citizens struggle to secure basic necessities. The country's leadership faces growing frustration from segments of the population who feel the economic pain most sharply. Protests have erupted in various cities over issues ranging from fuel prices to political freedoms, revealing cracks in the internal stability that the leadership cannot afford to ignore. These internal pressures push Iranian officials to occasionally seek moments of de-escalation, not because their ideology has softened, but because prolonged conflict risks deepening domestic unrest that could challenge their grip on power. At the same time, Israel, too, confronts its own internal challenges. The political landscape in Israel has become increasingly fractured, with frequent elections and shifting coalitions creating instability within the government. Divisive issues such as judicial reforms, the treatment of Palestinian territories, and public protests against controversial policies have consumed much of the nation's attention. Maintaining a constant state of high tension with Iran serves as a rallying point to unite the population around national security, But extended conflict comes with risks. Military engagements drain resources, endanger soldiers, and create an atmosphere of perpetual anxiety among civilians who live under the constant threat of missile attacks. Both governments understand that a sudden escalation into full-scale war could spiral beyond their control, potentially inviting broader regional involvement and drawing in unpredictable consequences. Therefore, while they maintain their postures of strength and defiance publicly, behind closed doors, there are powerful incentives for both sides to negotiate ceasefires, or at least pauses, in open hostility. These pauses provide breathing room to manage domestic issues, consolidate power, and rebuild internal stability before the next round of tensions inevitably surfaces. Economic realities also play a role in these calculations. Iran, desperate to maintain some level of international trade and financial relief, often uses de-escalation efforts to open diplomatic doors that might ease sanctions, even if temporarily. Israel, dependent on a strong economy to support its technological and defense industries, also benefits from periods of calm that reassure investors and international partners. In this sense, both sides occasionally see the value of a staged agreement not as a step toward genuine peace, but as a tactical move to stabilize their internal landscapes while keeping their long-term strategic goals unchanged. These domestic calculations create a fragile balance where temporary ceasefires become tools of political survival rather than true resolutions of deep-rooted conflict. While Iran and Israel may agree to a ceasefire on paper, the reality on the ground tells a different story. One of the most significant reasons the conflict remains unresolved is the continued activity of proxy groups that operate across the region with direct or indirect support from Iran. These groups are not bound by diplomatic negotiations or official ceasefires. They exist outside the limits of formal statecraft, driven by ideology, long-term grievances, and strategic goals that often align with Iran's interests, but operate independently. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen are just a few examples of actors who remain active, armed, and engaged regardless of any temporary pause between Tehran and Tel Aviv. Hezbollah, with its deep military capabilities and political influence in Lebanon, poses a direct and persistent threat to Israel's northern border. Despite ceasefire agreements, its arsenal continues to grow, and its rhetoric remains openly hostile. The group considers itself part of the larger axis of resistance, a coalition bound by a shared commitment to oppose Israeli and Western influence in the region. This ideological framework ensures that even if Iran publicly agrees to de-escalate, groups like Hezbollah feel morally obligated to continue their operations. In Gaza, organizations such as Hamas and Islamic Jihad frequently engage in rocket attacks, border skirmishes, and underground tunnel warfare. Although not all their actions are directly ordered by Tehran, Iran's financial and logistical support empowers these groups to act in ways that keep pressure on Israel, even during official lulls in hostilities. This indirect warfare allows Iran to maintain plausible deniability while continuing to exert influence and destabilize its adversaries through proxy hands. Israel, for its part, does not view these groups as separate from Iran's larger strategic apparatus. It considers them extensions of Iranian influence, and often responds to their attacks by targeting Iranian assets in Syria or conducting covert operations aimed at disrupting supply chains and command structures. This means that even if Iran and Israel agree to a ceasefire, the continued activity of these proxies undermines any notion of true peace. Moreover, these groups also respond to developments in the broader Islamic world. reacting to events in Jerusalem, the West Bank, or even outside the Middle East. Their motivations are not always tied directly to Iran-Israel dynamics, but their actions inevitably affect that relationship. This creates a volatile environment where any act by a proxy can trigger a broader response, effectively rendering official ceasefires symbolic at best. As long as these groups remain armed and active, the region exists in a state of fragile calm, always on the edge of renewed conflict. In the world of international politics, appearances often carry more weight than reality, and the Iran-Israel ceasefire may be no exception. Ceasefire announcements serve a critical role in shaping global narratives, offering political leaders the chance to project stability, control, and diplomatic maturity to both their domestic audiences and the international community. These staged agreements can ease international criticism, reduce global market anxiety, and create the illusion of progress even when the underlying tensions remain unresolved. For both Iran and Israel, agreeing to a temporary ceasefire offers valuable political currency that extends far beyond the immediate military situation. For Iran, entering into a ceasefire can momentarily ease international pressure, especially from nations and organizations calling for de-escalation. It allows Iranian leaders to present themselves as rational actors willing to negotiate, which can help soften the global perception of Iran as an aggressor. This softened image can be strategically useful when seeking relief from sanctions, engaging in nuclear negotiations, or attracting investment from countries looking for stability in the region. By appearing cooperative on the global stage, Iran can attempt to create diplomatic openings that serve its broader long-term goals. Israel, too, benefits from the optics of a ceasefire. In the face of growing global scrutiny over its military operations and treatment of Palestinians, agreeing to a ceasefire allows Israeli leadership to counter criticism by presenting themselves as willing to pursue peace. This narrative is particularly important in maintaining support from Western allies, calming domestic opposition, and reassuring financial markets that ongoing conflict will not spiral into full-scale war. It also provides the Israeli government with breathing space to refocus on internal political challenges without the distraction of active military operations dominating public discourse. Meanwhile, global powers watching from the sidelines often welcome these staged agreements as convenient solutions to complex problems they are unwilling or unable to fully address. The United States, the European Union, and other actors can point to the ceasefire as evidence of effective diplomacy and stability, even if they privately recognize the fragile nature of such agreements. These narratives serve to reassure investors, protect oil markets, and reduce the risk of broader regional escalation that could disrupt the global economy. Yet, beneath the polished language of ceasefire declarations, the root causes of conflict remain untouched. Proxy groups remain active, core ideological differences persist, and military preparations continue behind closed doors. These staged agreements are not true peace, but carefully managed pauses, designed to serve political objectives on multiple levels. They temporarily quiet the noise of conflict while the machinery of tension continues to turn, ready to reignite as soon as circumstances shift. In this sense, the ceasefire becomes more of a strategic performance than a genuine resolution, crafted for global consumption while the real struggle quietly endures. At the heart of the Iran-Israel conflict lie core issues that no ceasefire, however carefully negotiated, has ever truly addressed. These unresolved foundations keep the conflict alive beneath every temporary pause, ensuring that any agreement remains fragile. The most prominent of these issues is Iran's nuclear program, which Israel perceives as an existential threat. Israel has consistently maintained that it will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon, fearing that such capability would permanently shift the balance of power in the region. Despite negotiations, inspections, and international agreements, like the now fractured Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, deep mistrust lingers. Israel believes Iran's true ambitions are hidden behind diplomatic maneuvers, while Iran sees Israel's constant threats and covert sabotage as proof of its own vulnerability. Beyond the nuclear issue, both nations compete for regional dominance through conflicting ideologies that shape their foreign policies. Iran positions itself as the leader of what it calls the axis of resistance, aligning with groups and governments that oppose Western influence and Israeli policies, particularly concerning the Palestinians. Israel, on the other hand, works to maintain its military and economic superiority while building strategic alliances with Arab states through agreements like the Abraham Accords. These competing visions for the region are not easily reconciled because they are deeply embedded in national identities and religious narratives that have been fueled for decades. The Palestinian issue remains another unresolved core that keeps tensions simmering. Iran's unwavering support for Palestinian groups like Hamas directly challenges Israel's security and political objectives. Every flare-up in Gaza or the West Bank reverberates back into the Iran-Israel relationship, making any peace between them contingent not only on bilateral negotiations, but also on broader regional conflicts that remain highly volatile. Adding to these layers are the personal political incentives that drive leaders on both sides to maintain a state of conflict. In both countries, hardline elements gain strength by portraying the other as a constant, looming threat. This fear helps consolidate power, justify military spending, and maintain national unity during periods of internal unrest. Leaders find it politically convenient to keep the narrative of an enemy alive, making genuine long-term peace not only difficult, but sometimes undesirable for those in power. Ultimately, these unresolved core issues act like embers beneath the ashes of every ceasefire. Even as the world celebrates moments of calm, these fundamental disagreements quietly sustain the tension. They ensure that without courageous and unprecedented political shifts, any peace agreement will be temporary at best, always vulnerable to collapse under the weight of deeply entrenched mistrust, competing ambitions, and ideological confrontation that continues to define the Iran-Israel relationship. And so, while the world applauds the headlines and celebrates the handshake, beneath the surface the storms still brews. This ceasefire between Iran and Israel is not peace, it is a pause. A carefully staged performance crafted for cameras and headlines, while the roots of conflict remain buried deep in history, ideology, and unresolved pain. True peace requires more than silence. It demands trust, sacrifice, and the courage to confront the truths that both sides have avoided for decades. Until then, this fragile calm will remain just that, fragile. A thin layer of quiet stretched over a battlefield still very much alive. Because real peace is not written in ink. It is written in the hearts of those willing to face the truth and break the cycle. And that day, my friends, has not yet come. Good luck and thank you, message. Thank you for staying with me on this journey into the hidden reality behind what the world calls peace. May you carry this understanding forward, not just in politics, but in life itself. Remember, true strength isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about having the courage to confront what lies beneath. Stay wise, stay strong, and may your journey always be blessed. Good luck and thank you.